Welcome to part 6 of the graduation of Jake Moon. If you're just coming here from part 5, I know I left you on a bit of a cliffhanger, so we're not going to dilly-dally. We're going to jump right into things. Jake was having a great day at school. He came home, there was an officer in the house, and his mom just wasn't even paying attention, and all of a sudden says, "Oh my gosh, Jake, you don't know yet. It's your grandfather." He walked away from the senior center this morning. For a second, I was speechless. "What? But how, Ma? I mean, how is that even possible? They've got an alarm on every door at that place. And besides, I thought Mrs. Russell stays with them over there." Mrs. Russell put her head on the table and muttered, "Dear Lord." Ma reached for her hand. "Alma does stay with him, Jake, but today when they got there, some men were painting outside of the building and Skelly wanted to watch. And then Alma mentioned to them that he used to be a painter and they told him he could help." Mrs. Russell interrupted. "They said it was okay. If it was okay with the people inside, it was okay with them. And then one of the painters gave him some white overalls and a hat to put on, and he said he'd keep an eye on Skelly while I ran inside to check with the program supervisor." She covered her face and shook her head. "I was only gone a couple of minutes, Bud, but the man didn't know much about Alzheimer's, I guess, because he got distracted mixing some paint, and when he turned around again, Skelly was gone." Ma stood up. "But we're going to get him back soon, though, right, officer? I mean, how hard can it be to find an old man in white painter's overalls and an ID necklace?" I still don't know if the cop was planning to answer, but if he was, he didn't do it fast enough to please my mother. "Excuse me, sir? I don't mean to be rude, but would it kill you to give us a little encouragement here?" The cop looked tired, and he said they would do their best. "So who's looking for him now?" I asked. "Like right this minute, I mean. Is anyone out there at all?" My mother nodded. 4 or 5 volunteers from the senior center have been driving around all day, and Aunt Margaret's been looking too. Right now she's picking up James from school, and the two of them are going to keep searching. Without another word, I flew out the front door and took off running. If anyone could find Skelly, I could. I'd start from the senior center and figure out where to go from there. I was only a block from the building when the patrol car pulled up next to me. It was the same cop who Ma had yelled at. He rolled down the window. "Hey kid, I told your mother I'd come get you. There's a lot of area to cover, and there's no sense having you and your grandfather both lost." I started backing up. "No, I can find him, I swear. I know all his favorite shortcuts around here." I pointed across the street. "See that alley over there? On Saturdays when we'd go fishing at the park, we'd always cut through that alley. Nobody knows that kind of stuff but me." It took all the nerve I had, but I walked away. I had only gone a few yards when the cop pulled up next to me again. He opened the passenger side door. "Okay, kid. How about this? You get in the car, I'll let you ride with me for a while." "Okay, yeah, good, thanks." And then I ran around the back and slid into the front seat. The car smelled like BO and cigarettes. Also, the side window was smeary with fingerprints. Through the glass, the world looked smudged and dirty. The cop picked up his walkie-talkie thing and told someone to call my mother. "Yeah, tell her I've got the kid with me and we're looking for the old man." The kid and the old man. Real nice. That's how police officers refer to you when they're not on their best behavior, being taped for cops, I guess. After he hung up, he asked, "Which way, kid?" I pointed to the alley again and he turned. We were almost to the other end when he yawned. His mouth opened so wide I think it could have held a bowling ball. Like he was so bored to tears with this whole stupid assignment he could hardly keep his eyes open. It really bothered me that he did that. He's worth your time if that's what you're wondering. He's not just some crazy old man. The cop stopped the car. "Look, kid, let's get something straight. I'm happy to look for your grandfather, okay? I want to look for your grandfather. In fact, my shift was over an hour ago. I volunteered to look for your grandfather. But I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning, so if you and your mother were expecting Officer Happy, you're just flat out of luck today." He looked over at me and raised his eyebrows. "We clear?" I squirmed uncomfortably in my seat and nodded. I was just about to turn my eyes back to the window when I glanced down and saw his gun. It was right there in his holster, not 2 feet away from me. I don't really like guns. Skelly hated them. I stared at the black handle of the gun and remembered the terrible ending of the Pearl. A chill ran through my body. What if John Steinbeck turned out to be right? What if there are some people in the world who just aren't meant to be happy? People whose lives just keep getting worse and worse and worse until they finally hit bottom and nothing can hurt them anymore. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. Turning back to the window, I looked through the smudge marks as we drove on. It was after dark when I finally got home. Aunt Margaret and James were sitting at the table with Ma. Mrs. Russell was standing at the back door window staring outside. There were bags of burgers and fries on the table, but nobody was eating. Not even James. All four looked up at me. I shook my head no. Ma stood up and hugged me. Don't worry, Jake. We'll find him. She crossed her fingers and looked at Aunt Margaret. Maybe even tonight, huh? After the news? My aunt crossed her fingers back. But I didn't get it. What do you mean? What's the news got to do with anything? With her fingers still crossed, my mother pointed to Aunt Margaret. Your aunt just got back from the TV station downtown. She took Dad's picture to the station manager, and the woman promised to show it on the 10 o'clock news tonight. Suddenly, I felt a little hopeful. That's good, Aunt Margaret. She smiled a little. No, seriously, that's really good. Why didn't I think of that? James smirked. Because the brains of the family thought of it first, that'd be me. Oh, yeah, right, sure you did, Einstein. No, seriously, Jake, I did. Why would I lie about that? I laughed out loud. Gee, I don't know, James. Maybe because you wouldn't know the truth if it came right up and bit you on the... My mother stood up so fast her chair fell over behind her. Do not start, Jake. I mean it. Don't you dare start this stuff now. Then she pushed the chair out of the way with her foot and hurried out of the room. Aunt Margaret narrowed her eyes. Thank you both so very much. This is just exactly what we needed. Then she left too. For a few seconds, James tapped his fingers on the table. Well, we're all pulling together nicely, he said dryly. After that, he drifted out the door to watch TV. I sat down in his chair and put my head in my hands. I don't know how long I stayed there, at least a couple of minutes probably. Mercy. My skin prickled when I heard her voice. Don't ask me how, but I'd managed to forget that Mrs. Russell was still in the room. I frowned. Why, though? Why was she still in the room? She wasn't a member of the family, really, and we sure as heck didn't need an audience watching us fall apart, especially not the person responsible for losing Skelly in the first place. I stood up and spun around. I think you need to go now, Mrs. Russell. She looked surprised. But your mother said I could stay until... Yeah, well, Ma's not feeling too good now, okay? I handed her a purse from off the counter. Here, I'll walk you to your car. I took her arm and led her outside. When we got to the porch, she started to sniffle. Everyone's mad at me. I didn't argue with her. At the top of the steps, she stopped and blew her nose. Sounded like the honk of a wild goose. Her car was a big old clunker of a thing. As I opened the heavy driver's side door, it swung wide and stuck on the edge of the curb. Slowly, Mrs. Russell came down the sidewalk. When she got in the car, she hunched forward slightly and leaned her head on the steering wheel. The horn honked loudly. Honest to God, the woman was a human honk machine. I couldn't stay there one more second, so I turned and hurried back inside. 15 minutes later, she was still out there. I had been hoping to outlast her, but my anger was fading and I couldn't hold on. So I went outside to the curb again. Look, no one's mad at you, okay, Mrs. Russell? We're just tired and stressed, that's all. We're just beat. I lifted the car door from its stuck position. Before I closed it, I bent down. Come back in the morning, okay? We all really want you to. She took my hand and patted it. I didn't pull away. For the next 3 hours, Ma and Aunt Margaret talked in the bedroom. If you walked down the hall, you could hear their voices all hushed and low coming through the bottom of the door. James and I were watching TV in the living room, and when the clock on the wall started to chime, I looked up. It was 8 o'clock, the time when we usually ask Skelly if he needed to use the bathroom. I closed my eyes. Oh, great. What's he going to do tonight? James looked over. What? Nothing. Never mind. It's just that we usually remind Skelly to pee around now, that's all. James looked curious. Remind him? Why do you need to remind him? How can a person forget to pee? Even a 3-year-old can tell when they have to. Hey, James, just take my word on this one, okay? He's forgotten before, that's all I'm saying. Okay, fine, he's forgotten. I just didn't know. He went over to the window and pulled back the curtains. I do know one thing for sure, it's pitch black dark out tonight. He leaned his face closer to the glass. Gosh, there's no moon out at all, hardly. I glared at him. Here's an idea, James. Why don't you try to make me even more sick about this than I already am? Suddenly, with no warning at all, James came charging at me from across the room. When he got to my chair, he shoved me in the shoulders with both hands. "Hey, knock it off," I said. "Shut up," he said. "Just shut up, Jake. What is it with you anyway? Why is everything always about you and your feelings? Why is it okay for you to worry me with all that stuff about Skelly's bathroom problems, but as soon as I say it's dark, bam, it's all about poor little Jakey and his sensitive feelings?" He shoved my shoulders again. "You think I'm not worried? Huh? You think I'm some jerk who doesn't love his own grandfather? Look, I get the picture, okay? You're the favorite grandson. That's always been made crystal clear. But that doesn't mean I don't love him just as much as you do." He flopped down on the couch again and started clicking through the channels with the remote. A second later, he brushed his hands across his eyes. He probably didn't think I saw that, but I did. I left the room and went to the kitchen until my breathing calmed down. A couple of minutes later, I started for my room, but I slowed down as I passed the living room door and muttered, "Sorry." I'm not sure if James heard me, but at least I said it. Sometimes I'm wrong. Not that often, but it happens. Ma came in to get me around 10. The news was about to start, and she wanted all of us to watch it together. James didn't even look at me when I walked back in. He and Margaret were sitting on the couch, and he turned his eyes away. We had to wait for almost 20 minutes for the story about Skelly to come on. The first time they broke away for commercials, the newswoman used Skelly as kind of like a teaser. "Coming up, a local family needs your help in finding a missing loved one." But when she came back, instead of the story on Skelly, she did an in-depth report on a farmer who grew a squash that looked like a baseball bat. Then more commercials, then the weather. Finally, when they came back from like their millionth commercial break, Skelly's picture was in a little box in the top corner of the TV screen. It was the same picture Ma had given the cop that afternoon. The woman's face went from smiling to serious in warp speed. "We have a sad story for you now. Earlier this morning, a local Alzheimer's patient wandered away from the Northeast Senior Center at 1750 Maple Avenue." The camera zoomed in on Skelly's face. "The police are asking for your help in finding this gentleman. He answers to the name of Sherman Kelly." James jumped up. "No, he doesn't!" All of us stared in disbelief as the woman moved on to the next story. She was already smiling again. I sat up the whole night with the lights on. I didn't even get under my covers. It just seemed fair to do that, I thought. When your grandfather is wandering around all night in the darkness, it seems sort of selfish to sleep through it all, safe and sound. I napped off and on the next day. I'd already told Ma that I wasn't going to school until we found Skelly, and she hadn't argued. When he still hadn't turned up by Thursday night, I sat up then, too. I took a cold shower at 2 in the morning and another one at 4:45 to stay awake. On Friday morning, I was the tiredest I'd ever been in my life. But thanks to all the cold showers, also probably the cleanest. Friday night around 6, I fell asleep on the couch eating a chopped sirloin TV dinner. Ma covered me up with an Afghan and let me sleep. I didn't wake up till almost 9 o'clock the next morning. That's when some idiot started pressing on our front doorbell. It's not healthy being scared awake by a door buzzer like that. It gets your heart rhythms totally out of whack. I was still trying to get my breathing under control when I heard Ma say, "Come in." I was sure it was Mrs. Russell. She'd been coming over every morning since Skelly had disappeared. I figured this time she must have forgotten her key. I pulled the Afghan over my head and tried to fall back asleep. I'd been having a dream and I wanted to get back to it. It had been about Skelly. He'd been wandering around in this huge sandy desert, but right before I woke up, I was pretty sure he'd spotted an oasis. I tried to put the pieces together. If the dream was about the desert, maybe I was worried that Skelly didn't have any water to drink. I've read that a person can only go a few days without water, but then again, you can't really die of thirst in the middle of a city, can you? The thought bothered me. Why can't you? Like if an old man is confused and scared, and he hardly even talks, where does he go to get a drink? Who will give him water? I don't know why I kept thinking the worst about everything, but my brain just kept focusing on the bad stuff. Like when I tried to remember some of our happy times together, my mind dredged up that awful morning when I'd snatched Skelly's Cheerios away. In fact, that's probably why in my dream he was wandering around all thirsty. Right before he stumbled into the desert, I'd probably snatched his milk away. "Jake." I heard my mother come into the room. I stayed still and pretended to be asleep, but Ma didn't fall for it. She pulled the Afghan away like it was a magician's cloth. I opened one eye. Standing in the doorway was another cop. A different cop than the one who I'd ridden with on Wednesday. This one was younger and in good shape. He was holding a helmet in his hand, so I figured he was a bike cop. It looked like there was something in his other hand too, but the doorway was blocking it from my view. "Jake, this is Officer Rios," my mother said. "He was just over at the park and he's got some news for us." The cop walked the rest of the way into the room. When I saw his other hand, my blood went cold. "Oh, Jesus, no." Ma rushed over. "No, Jake, no. It's not what you're thinking. Nothing has happened to Skelly. They found this hat at the park yesterday afternoon, but they think it's good news, Jake. They think it's a lead. That means Skelly's probably been there recently. Yesterday, right? You think he was there yesterday?" The officer hemmed and hawed a little. "Well, we think it's possible he was there yesterday, like I already told you, ma'am. My partner and I found that hat at the edge of the lake around 4:30 p.m., but we have no way of telling exactly when it got there." My brain froze around his words. At the edge of the lake? From that second on, the rest of what he said faded in and out. There was something about how the hat had been found near the water but not in it, and something else about how there was no evidence of foul play. Finally, he started backing toward the hall. "So, mainly, I just wanted to come by and tell you folks that the search we're going to do today is pretty routine, and we're very confident we're not going to find anything down there. But, just to be sure, we sent down a couple of divers." Ma's hand flew over her mouth. Right away, Officer Rios started going on and on about how he'd seen lots of these water searches and how they almost never found anything, and how he'd come back to give us an update as soon as he could. But Ma didn't nod, didn't walk him to the door, didn't do anything. After he left, I called Aunt Margaret. She and James were at our house in 15 minutes. Mrs. Russell came running in behind them a minute later. Officer Rios had left the painter's hat on the coffee table. It's weird, too, how totally different their reactions were when they saw it. James mouthed a silent cuss word. Aunt Margaret glued her eyes to it and kept them there all the way to her seat. Mrs. Russell put it on. I'm not kidding. She snatched it right off the table, stuck it on her head, and said it wasn't coming off until Skelly got home. That made Ma smile slightly, at least. After that, the tension eased in the room a little. I turned on the TV just for the noise. A baseball game was on, but I doubt if any of us could have told you who was playing or what the score was. The TV screen was just a place to aim our eyes while we waited. 3 times I tried changing rooms. Once I went into the kitchen and made paper airplanes out of the napkins in the holder. The other 2 times I went to my room and rolled around on my bed. But it was never long before I was back in the living room with the others. Aunt Margaret was the first one to spot Officer Rios coming up the front porch steps. "Oh my God, he's back." She leapt from her chair and took off running. James was right on her heels and Ma was on his. When the dust finally settled, Mrs. Russell and I were the only ones who hadn't moved a muscle. She glanced over at me. "If the news is good, it'll get here quick enough. If the news is bad, I ain't in no hurry to hear it." I turned my eyes away from the window. Everyone was on the porch, and I couldn't stand to watch. Seconds passed, but they felt like hours. Suddenly, there was a bang. I looked over and saw James's meaty face pressed against the window in a wild grin. They didn't find him! I thought my heart was going to explode. I sprang off the couch and started jumping up and down. They didn't find him! They didn't find him! Did you hear that, Mrs. Russell? I knew he was okay. I knew it! I just knew it! I grabbed the painter's hat off her head and put it on mine. This stupid hat isn't even his, I bet. And if it is his, there are a million ways it could have gotten to the edge of the water. Like the wind could have blown it, or a dog might have carried it down there, or, and Mrs. Russell shrieked, or a whooping crane could have flown it. I stopped jumping and just stood there. That's the whole trouble with Mrs. Russell. Just when you think you may have made a connection, she goes and says something so freaky it kind of scares you. Seconds later, my mother came running into the room. She pulled Mrs. Russell up from her chair and hugged us both. "Oh, Jake, thank God. Alma, they didn't find him." She took our hands and pulled us into the kitchen. Aunt Margaret had already started making sandwiches. "Who's hungry?" she asked us. We all shouted, "I am," like a bunch of 3-year-olds. Seems odd, I guess, that our happiest moment in days would be not finding Skelly, but when your week has been as stressful as ours, you don't really sit around and analyze whether it's okay to feel good for a second and eat a peanut butter sandwich. James and I took our lunch outside and ate it on the porch. We didn't talk much, just sat on the top step, chewed and swallowed. I was standing up to take my plate inside when I saw a cab turn down the street. James saw it too. We both craned our necks. There was something weird strapped to the top of it. Something metal, it looked like. "What the heck?" said James. The cab got closer. James squinted. "Is that what I think it is? Does that guy actually have a... No." "Yep. It's a grocery cart," I said in amazement. "He's got a grocery cart strapped to the top of his cab." The car slowed down and began inching past the Waxman's. James started talking out the side of his mouth. 10-1, that guy stole that cart." I looked at him oddly. "He can't hear you, James. He's in the car one house over." But James just kept talking in that same stupid way. "Yeah, well, all I'm saying is those carts are worth a lot of money, that's all." Just then, the car swung over to the curb and the driver got out. Started walking toward James and me. He was a big guy, muscular with tattoos. James stopped moving his lips completely and began trying to talk like a ventriloquist. "What's he coming over here for? What's he want with us? Tell him we don't live here." By now, the man was almost to the porch. I was thinking that maybe I should go get Ma when I heard the front door open behind me. "Yes? Can I help you?" Ma called out. The driver shrugged. "I don't know. I hope so. I'm looking for 433 8th Avenue. Thought it was next door, but I couldn't find the house number." Ma hesitated a second, then pointed to the small 433 over our door. "This is the right address, but no one here called a taxi." In a flash, the driver spun around and headed back to his cab. "Wait, hold it, don't move," he hollered. He opened the back door of the car and reached in with both arms. Carefully, he helped his passenger into the street. Ma started to sob. Skelly was home. And we'll stop there on a much, much happier note than when we ended part 5 with Skelly being missing. Now, we still have some unanswered questions. It's wonderful that Skelly is home. I'm sure Jake and his whole family are going to be thrilled when we begin our final part the next time we post a video. But we still have the question of where's he been and who is this cab driver that brought him home? So we still have some story to tell. We've got one more part, and I hope you join us back for that when it gets uploaded in the very near future. And as we will finish off the graduation of Jake Moon. Bye.